Welcome, Nance. It is good to see you again.
It is so great to be here and to see you, and I'm glad we're having another town hall. It's been too long.
Exactly. Well, I remember when I first met you, the town hall we did was so popular, people still talk about it. And we did that town hall because it was an opportunity for people to learn. You remember it was the beginning of the Trump administration. Right. We called it from Nixon to Trump. Yeah. And really wanted to have you go into depth about what you knew, because we were so concerned about Russia and all of that at the time.
And it all turned out to be true. Everything we discussed.
All of your predictions turned out to be true.
Oh my God, I wish I wasn't so good at this.
You are an amazing author. You are a former naval intelligence officer and foreign policy analyst. You founded Terror Asymmetrics Project on Strategy, Tactics, and Radical Ideologies, a New York-based think tank, which is perfect for our discussion today. I can't think of a more perfect organization than that. So I'm so glad that you're here with us today. And our goal is to really provide the audience, everyone who watches this, with an in-depth understanding of what the heck is happening here. We've been on a wild ride for the last 4 years with the Trump administration. We've seen parts of our country move radically to the right, and it culminated in an insurrection in the nation's capital for the first time in U.S. history. And so I think it's important that we spend some time and really get to the bottom, from your perspective, of what you think happened here. So that's what we hope to accomplish today.
Well, I hope I can be helpful.
Well, I know you can. So why don't we start?
Well, you know, when we had this discussion back in 2017, the undercurrents of what we saw happen on January 6th were already being laid. You know, we saw that the American public, there was a small segment of the American public that to themselves, to their own impression, really did not like the idea of what they called politically correctness, right? Political correctness, which you and I call common decency.
Right, exactly.
They just hated the whole idea that they had to be beholden to the way things are done, that the way that they behaved was being seen with opprobrium, you know, that people were looking down on them, and that they found their tribal chief in Donald Trump, the man who would uphold their beliefs that there was a segment of the American public who were the real rulers of this country and would always be the rulers of this country, no matter what the demographics are. And he tapped into a vein of Americans that he claimed he was going to represent.
Right.
And he was going to bring them up. And by the time the election was done and the way that they were behaving in the transition, what I call a masters of the universe attitude. We won, we own everything. We can do whatever we want, right? We'll just do foreign policy behind the back of the president of the United States at that time, and we don't care what he thinks. We'll call the Russians and tell them, don't listen to this guy. We'll do whatever we want, right? We don't care if it breaks laws. We are the laws. That was the attitude. Now, this was turning into a crescendo, and his supporters put him in office, right? Donald Trump moved into the White House, and it only got worse from there, right?
Absolutely.
There was no time that things went quietly or smoothly. And this was part of their strategy, to elevate the most crude of his most base supporters, to elevate them into a position where the average one of them, it harkens back to that old saying that they said about slavery. If you can convince the poorest white man to believe that he is better than the best educated or richest black man or woman,
right,
then they will not only give you money, they will empty their pockets to you. And we saw it in practice here.
That is so, so sad. So talking about January 6th, the mob. We know that it was a mob, but we also know that within that mob, there were organized elements. Right. And so I have heard of several organizations, and I'd love if you could tell me, who are these people? A name like the Boogaloo Boys, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, the Traditionalist Workers' Party, the Neo-Confederates, the Holocaust deniers. Yeah. So you could see the mob coming, but there were clearly people in full military gear.
Right.
Who are these groups? Are they white supremacists? Do they have international ties? Who are they?
This is what makes the basis of a domestic violent extremist group. Middle class, actually there's quite a number of people from the middle class and upper middle class who support Trump, right? The people
one of the stereotypes is that they're uneducated.
No, they're not all uneducated. I believe that there was a statistic that the median income was between 100 and 150,000.
Oh,
These
wow.
guys who they may have a small business and a boat, you know, or, a bass boat and 2 or 3 franchises.
Right.
These are the average Americans. But within them, they saw in Donald Trump someone who would never allow demographics to put them out of power. And the statistics of that by 2050, the United States will be the average white American will be a minority, 49% of the population, terrified them. Trump brought their fears to Washington and said, I will fight to ensure that there is always dominance.
What do they think they're going to lose?
Well, they think they're going to lose what they were saying. They came here to stop. They were going to lose America. America's about to be taken away from us. No. What they fear is democracy, right? So let me go back on the characters where this all came from.
Sure.
When Charlottesville happened, you saw a multitude of groups come together in an organized rally called Unite the Right.
Yes.
And people kept saying to me, where did that come from? How did these people form? Well, they were forming because the right wing, or what we called at that time the alt-right, right, were being empowered through Donald Trump's presidency. They saw themselves now able to rise. The Ku Klux Klan, David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, openly telling people to vote for Donald Trump, and that we have a person in the White House. All of these guys have an affinity for guns, right? I'm a gun collector, I do too. But for them, it was like a fundamental belief in life that the Second Amendment, right, was given to them with the purpose of overthrowing tyrannical government, which is what it wasn't about at all. Those people came together in this, how can I put it, a conglomeration of all of their grievances, tearing down Confederate statues, right? The belief that the South was robbed at the end of the Civil War, that blacks are inferior people and whites are always superior people.
Well, what about during the time of Obama and the Tea Party?
Oh.
Didn't those fears actually arise there?
Same people.
Same people.
They're just a different name. At that time, their anger of giving people health care to save their lives. It didn't mean you were going to get health care. It meant I was going to get health care, and I don't want minorities or brown people or women to have health care. You saw another spike in tribalism. Trump brought them all together like the Vikings, right? All into one tribe. I make that reference to the Vikings because at Charlottesville, they had shields with runic symbols on them, right? Norse mythological symbols on them. So these guys all came together, but people constantly ask me, in the intelligence community even, well, how did they get organized? And as a matter of fact, they were actually communicating on a game server called Discord. It's a communication structure where you can do live chat, live voice, all these things. And during the Charlottesville rally, they were giving, instruction and tippers and what to do. How do you build those shields?
Do they communicate through games as a way of hiding their communication?
Yes. So it's a form of tradecraft. So these disparate groups all got brought together in Charlottesville. And then you saw them do the Tiki Torch, baby Nazi march.
Right.
Where they went around and
showed... You will not replace us.
But Charlottesville was designed to be a coming out party for the American right-wing extremists, or what we would call now DVE, domestic violent extremists. And they were there to show America that with Trump in the Oval Office, we are the civilian paramilitary, right? The underground against liberalism and against progressivism, and technically against everyone who is not one of them. in the United States. So when the president said there were very fine people on both sides,
right,
and the uproar that went through that, almost to the point where people were calling on Trump to resign, most people thought that that broke up the alt-right. Mm-hmm. It didn't. They went underground quietly for a couple of years. And what they did do was this. They started subtly preparing themselves to be essentially a political paramilitary associated with the Trump campaign. So you had the Proud Boys, which started as sort of this racist, chauvinist street gang that wanted to go against liberals in literal fist fights. They would literally go around to cities and start fights, right? And they moved on to weaponizing themselves. And they went all over the country to do this. There are Proud Boy chapters in practically every city.
About how big is it? About how many people do you think?
You know, the Proud Boys is a nebulous group because, you know, you could say that you're a Proud Boy and boom, you're in. They watched how the Trump administration ran things. Remember when I said how the Trump administration ruled like they were masters of the universe? They didn't care about the majority. They only cared about that 45 to 40% that supported Donald Trump.
That's right.
All policies were oriented to the 40 to 45% that voted for Donald Trump.
And they also didn't care about the law, so they had no problem violating the law.
Of course they don't care about the law. Remember, masters of the universe, they own the law. That was the whole point about packing the courts with Trump appointees. That was the whole thing about getting some people in the Supreme Court so that you could have a conservative America, no matter, even if 75% of the country voted for something that was progressive.
Let me tell you how I describe it, and you tell me if this is correct. That the fear, the terror over the demographic shift led parts of our country to figure out how to establish minority rule. Right. Well, we have three branches of government: the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary. The judiciary is the only branch where you have lifetime appointments.
Right.
If you have lifetime appointments there and the other two branches change, whatever laws you pass, you can just overturn it in the court.
Absolutely. I had I knew an FBI officer who was a highly accomplished FBI officer, loved talking to this guy, you know, loved being around this guy. And in 2016, I said, "Why did you vote for Trump?" He goes, "Supreme Court."
Oh.
And I go, "Really?" He goes, "We control the Supreme Court, we control the laws." And I go, "In defiance of the rest of the United States," right? You know, well, you voted for these people. They, you know, many of them have a very mistaken belief that the United States, of what the definition of a republic is, right? A republic is a democracy in which the rights of the minority are protected. The rest of that part, the, you know, rights of the minority thing, they don't agree with that at all, unless it's them.
Right.
In the minority.
Right.
Then they think that they can dominate the majority. Then the militia movement in the United States. Every state has militias. Militias are these self-styled people who have bought into that corrupt NRA theory that the militias are formed to fight against government. So the militia movement has expanded dramatically in the United States.
And it has been around for a long time. So some of my colleagues that represent districts in rural Georgia, Alabama, et cetera, have described that there's like training camps and that people were preparing in case the election didn't go the right way. Is that something you're
still doing it?
Yeah.
Still doing it. And I have people on both sides of the aisle, black and white, coming and asking me, should I buy a gun? And I always say, no.
Jeez.
Buy it, you know, start voting regularly.
Right.
You just showed real power in this last election.
Well, let me ask you, going back to January 6th, where was U.S. intelligence? You know, why didn't they know? I mean, you know, it has been said that the Capitol Police actually did get the information. They did know. But Trump made several moves in his last couple of months, changing leadership at the Pentagon, et cetera. And so what happened there? What was the connection or relationship to Trump's moves in the last couple of months, switching positions, and what we saw?
Well, I've got some bad news for you. First off, most of the U.S. intelligence community does not feed into domestic intelligence. So when we're talking about going after militiamen in Michigan who may have a training camp in southern Wisconsin, we are not using U2, you know, intelligence collection systems and Army intelligence collection systems against American citizens.
The FBI?
No. Well, there is the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Joint Terrorism Task Force that the FBI has established around the United States to feed in information from local law enforcement. That is where the information should and was coming. The Capitol Police, as I understand it, their intelligence division did receive and generate an intelligence report somewhere around 96 to 48 hours before the event saying this was going to be a mass event. The possibility of them coming to the building is being discussed amongst them. We saw this intelligence. I was collecting it real time from my house, along with a team that I had all over the United States. And we saw the banners storm the Capitol. They were selling T-shirts on Etsy that said this. January 6th. Donald Trump was January 6th.
So supposedly, I don't know if they made the request to the Pentagon, because in order to get the National Guard to come to the Capitol, they needed permission from the Pentagon.
Right. This is where Acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller comes in. And I suspect that when there's a national commission on this, and he's hauled before the spotlights to testify before the nation as to why. I mean, this is a guy who was in the job as Pentagon chief for about 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. He was a former Special Forces colonel. He was assigned to the National Counterterrorism Center, and he was jumped above everyone in the United States government into the Acting Secretary of Defense job. Well, it's suspected because Secretary Esper was not going to do the bidding of the president. And apparently, based on reporting, the bidding is that he would not put resources between this protest and this building. And so there's a memo that's out that has been verified as a Pentagon memo where he directed the DC National Guard not to have a quick reaction force, no helmets, no riot gear for this protest, because this protest was supposed to be Trump voters who were white, who were coming here, and that they were not going to upset these people. And that's why the entire national security apparatus disarmed itself. You know, I think all of these people need to be held to account. They need to come in and explain themselves. I would like to see Secretary Miller say, why did you disarm the DC National Guard? Some very fundamental things could have occurred as a matter of general process that would have protected the campus of the Capitol Hill, allowing the DC National Guard to do what they normally do in case of protests. All we have to do is look back at the protests in June and July at Lafayette Square to see what the full measure of the United States government can do. I mean, the Attorney General brought in riot police from federal prisons to Lafayette Square.
That was the Black Lives Matter
for the Black Lives Matter protest. But not only brought in the National Guard, used National Guard aviation elements, used every federal law enforcement officer, FBI hostage rescue team, all of these groups here, which, to be honest, at the sitting of the certification on January 6th, you were only missing two elements for that to have been the State of the Union: the President and the Supreme Court. So why was that not declared a special national security event at that time? You had the House of Representatives and the Senate in joint session with the Vice President of the United States, Vice President-elect of the United States, the Speaker of the House of the United States. Had it gone wrong that day, had people been, God forbid, I don't even like saying it, killed or incapacitated or injured, it would have left, if Mike Pence had been incapacitated, or the Speaker of the House, or the President of the Senate pro tem, it would have left Donald Trump as the sole person in the United States government.
Wow, that
Did you not think about that?
No.
What if you had all been tear gassed for the length of time? No one would have been able to swear anybody in if someone had been killed or injured.
It still leaves me to the point. Okay, even if that had happened, and I don't mean the massacre of people.
Yeah, please.
So they delayed it. It was inevitable.
And that upset them the most. Do you know that?
Was what?
I monitor their chats. I mean, I'm up at 3 every morning monitoring their Telegram channels, their Parler channels. You know what upset them the most about the Stop the Steal rally?
What?
that you came back that same day and executed the certification of the election.
What did they think? We were going to come back the next day? So how did we get there? I mean, especially with that. I remember the scene in the Capitol of these men going through the desk, looking for evidence. I don't know what they were looking for. And then one walks away and says, well, Senator Cruz.
Ted Cruz would approve.
Ted Cruz would approve.
There's gotta be something in here we can fucking use against these scumbags. Something's talking about verifying. This is crazy. Alright, don't fuck with him. He's a good one. Him and Lawler, or whatever.
Cruz, I think Cruz would want us to do this, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're good.
What were they possibly looking for? Another scene where they were looking for the ballots. Like they were going to steal them, and then that was going to stop the whole process. So we came back that night.
For weeks, this had been fed to them, that they could stop this.
And what?
And what?
Stop the counting.
I'm
and
almost
what?
sorry I'm doing this town hall. And install a dictatorship.
Okay. And
That was their goal, was to establish Donald Trump as the winner of that election, and that through people power, they would install him as a dictator.
You know, let me just say that I know one thing that has changed. In the past, and by past, I mean just a few weeks ago, my Republican colleagues were concerned about being primaried, were concerned about being attacked politically. You know, Trump would tweet. Now I've heard them express they're concerned about being physically harmed.
Physically harmed.
And it does seem to have taken on, you know, a whole nother level.
They should fear that. I mean, you saw what happened to Lindsey Graham at the airport, right?
Right.
Usually, you know, if Lindsey Graham's at the airport, you get a couple of people with selfies. They attacked him. They literally, I mean, you literally had to have, you know, TSA and airport police, you know, protect him. And they have been denied something they had been promised for 4 years, that the government of the United States will always be in their power.
So I've also heard a number of news stories that after Biden was actually sworn in, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris became the leadership of the country, that a lot of the QAnon followers now, I don't know where they go, because he was supposed to have taken over. They feel betrayed by him. So what do you think now?
Well, don't forget that the basis of the QAnon conspiracy theory also included Donald Trump as this golden hero. Interestingly enough, I really think that the origins of that came from during the election campaign. There was a painting done in Russia that showed Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Marine Le Pen, the leader of the Front National, their right-wing extremist group, all in armor like Joan of Arc, right? They were all in armor next to each other, and they were supposed to be like these heroes bringing what I call, you know, what we now see as neo-fascism, but what I called at the time in one of my books, an axis of autocracy to the West, and that Putin was backing these rich oligarchs, these American and French oligarchs, to knock down Western liberal democracy. And to do that, the best way to destroy democracy, vote it out using democracy, right? Vote autocracy in, vote dictatorship and oligarchy in. And that almost happened. It's just for 4 years, Donald Trump had been promising them blood sport. He had been promising that he would take it to the libs, right? Own the libs. The media world that they had. So the most virulent amongst them had delved into this fantasy that he was this hero in armor, you know, long flowing hair, and that he was going to destroy liberalism. Liberalism itself, and I mean small L liberalism.
Right.
Anyone that wasn't Trump is a liberal progressive, as they call them now, commie, you know, Chinese-backed communist.
So you don't think that the QAnon, because Biden is now president, you don't think that a big element of that falls away because...
That key component of Trump as the knight in shining armor was supposed to be bringing back the rise of white culturalism and white supremacy in America. And to do it, they believed in a thing called the storm. And the storm was supposed to be Donald Trump using all elements of US government power to arrest, take to Guantanamo, try for treason, and execute all Democrats, Hollywood elites, and anyone in the news media who opposed Donald Trump. So by the time Black Lives Matter flared up, these groups we thought had gone underground and were breaking up after Charlottesville, the alt-right, every one of them popped up, right? Militiamen going into Michigan to attack the governor and lay siege to the governor, to the State House because she asked them to wear masks. Right. Right? But the other component of it was their belief that they were taking over government wasn't happening and that they would have to affect it. And what had gone was the phrase alt-right had disappeared. And it had broken down to Proud Boys, Boogaloo Boys, militiamen, Three Percenters, Oath Keepers. All of these paramilitary groups had one thing in common by summer of 2020. They all wore the Make America Great Again hat.
So let's talk now about the involvement of the military. Right. Or rather, I'm sorry, let me say it the other way around. These groups' involvement in the military, because they said quite a number of them were either active, former, retired, military, and police. Right. So to what extent do you go into the military and get radicalized, or are you a radical going into the military for training? Are you the same thing with the police department? You know,
I went through this whole evolution when Timothy McVeigh blew up the Murrah building.
Timothy McVeigh was
the right-wing extremist terrorism who in 1985, set off a multi-thousand-pound car bomb in Oklahoma City that killed 168 people.
That immediately after that bombing, they were sure it was a person of Arab descent.
I myself, as a Middle East counterterrorism professional, overseas in Europe on a submarine, thought somehow somebody got through the southern border, built a bomb, and it was a Middle Eastern terrorist. Interestingly enough, we never thought it would be an American that would carry out a weapon of mass destruction attack on that scale. Yeah. But Timothy McVeigh he radicalized in the military, unbeknownst to the military. I met the state trooper that pulled him over. It was a fascinating conversation. He said when he approached the car, he knew something was wrong with it. It was an old beater, Cadillac or something, and he said no license plate. And he had just received right-wing extremist training, and he saw, like a Gadsden flag, a don't tread on me thing. And when he looked in the car, he saw a kid wearing a military-style jacket. And he was very cooperative. And he said, where are you coming from? And he goes, Oklahoma City. And he said, son, are you armed? And McVeigh reaches over, opens his jacket and goes, yes, I am. Like, I'm in on it with you. I'm one of you. I did this thing. I'm part of your system. So McVeigh, the cop said, I have my man. This guy thinks I'm with him. And that's the whole thing. They think white policemen, white sheriffs, white soldiers are all part of their network due to their ethnicity, not due to the loyalty to the oath of the Constitution of the United States.
So, well, I surely wonder what they must think now that the Secretary of Defense is an African-American person.
Oh, well, that's the cabal putting the fix-in on the military, right?
But what does it say? I mean, still, are people radicalized in the military? And if that's the case, what the heck is going on in our military that doesn't see the development of white supremacy?
Well, here, we've been really busy fighting wars for the last 20-some-odd years. Usually things that crop up in the armed forces are because someone within their peer group sees it. I mean, when I went through in the military in the 80s, I had some very open racism, even in the intelligence community. But usually things were seen at a very low level. I suspect that in the era of Trump, it's sort of like the age of Bush. We had a lot of violations of civil liberties and human rights in the armed forces in Abu Ghraib prison, because the the feeling coming from the White House was do whatever you need to do to these people. And that's why abuses occurred. In the era of Trump, I think that it was pretty well under control for a while. But people in the armed forces come from every aspect of American life.
Right.
Right? So you're going to have right-wing extremists, people who are extremely political. But I feel that when the Trump administration came in, it empowered, again, the lowest person in any organization to feel that they had a megaphone in the White House. And I don't know, I mean, I haven't been in the armed forces in almost 2 decades, but I live my life like I'm in the armed forces every day. And there was just an incident a few days ago where a black sailor had a noose left on his bed on a ship. And I wrote to the Chief of Naval Operations and the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, because at the rank that I was in, a Navy chief, this would never have happened in my world, all right? But it happened. What made it happen? What made that sailor think he could get away with it, even if it was a joke?
Right.
Right? He should have been in mortal terror of his division chiefs. Well, right?
I was listening to an interview the other day, and a retired military officer said, well, I mean, people have freedom of speech in the military, and we know those, elements are there, but there's nothing we can do about it.
Yes,
I'm like,
there is.
I don't understand that.
No, all right, somebody needs to be brought before Congress. There is something you can do about it. Look, when I was in the Navy in the mid-'80s, we had the great tailhook scandal, where Navy officers were sexually assaulting, harassing, and raping women at a conference, at the Top Gun conference of all the Navy pilots. In Las Vegas, if I'm not mistaken. And that revolutionized what kind of training we received in the Navy. Non-stop for years. Sexual assault, sexual harassment, equal opportunity.
Well, is there any training about white supremacy, about any of that?
Not about white supremacy, but equal opportunity. And we got an extensive amount of equal opportunity training.
Yeah, to me, this is an equal opportunity. Right-wing extremism.
No, there was none. And, I know General Austin, or now Secretary of Defense Austin, former general, has said that he is going to make this a top priority. There's going to be a 30-day stand down to where, they did this with Islamic terrorism.
Right.
In the military. They were looking for, what we call the insider threat. People who would self-radicalize by watching videos and then would take guns, like, so Major Nabal Hassan.
Muslims who were in the military would often feel discriminated against.
Muslims are in the military since the American Revolution, and yes, they were discriminated against. I mentored a young sailor who they literally told him they would not allow him to do any duties because they thought he was a terrorist. And they were like bringing NCIS onto the ship every week. And he was like, all I want to do is my job. Let them do their job. The question is, what are you reading? What are you saying to your shipmates? If you're hiding it, it's going to out itself at some point, like making a noose and putting it on someone's bed. And if you're deployed overseas, we read your text messages. We read your emails, all right, to make sure that you're not spilling operational secrets. And if you're talking to somebody who's on the FBI watch list, there needs to be a fusion cell for that, whether, OSI, NCIS, DOD
But if you
wants
have
to address
all of
that.
this racist communication, well, we're not really paying attention to that because that's not what
but,
you just described?
Yeah, well, those thoughts, all while protected by freedom of speech, are also violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Because they're not protected by freedom of speech in the military, right?
Oh, we don't have freedom of speech.
Exactly.
We have freedom to follow orders.
Exactly.
But no, jokingly, all jokes aside, we do have to root out extremists. And we also need to make it very clear at every rank in the armed forces what General Milley did last year after the election, which was put out a memo saying, we don't serve a man, we serve a nation. Every person is valuable. I don't care what their job is. I was known as a really hardcore chief when I was in. I still have people that hate me for my time in the military. You know why? Because my philosophy, my dad was a master chief in the Navy. He joined the Navy at 15 to go to World War II, right? And rose to the rank of master chief and served in 3 wars. And he had one philosophy. His philosophy was this, and I use this all the time. get to work, right? I don't care what you look like, all right? So long as you're in standards. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you do. I'm going to see that you do the mission of the armed forces. Now, what if we have people in there who are using the armed forces as a gateway to violence and radicalism?
Right.
That too can be detected based on their email associations. And you know, the military is very flexible about what they can and cannot monitor, and we'll see what the Secretary of Defense does. But the culture of every person in this armed force is equal and is as good as the effort that they put out. That's it. If there's an officer that believes in the philosophy of QAnon, you are not fit to serve in the armed forces of the United States. If there is a junior sailor who comes in and believes that women are not up to the job, that person needs to be out of this game. It's as simple as that.
Now, some accounts on some stations have said, well, maybe they weren't Trump supporters.
Oh my God.
Maybe they were actually Antifa. So we've just spent time talking about these organizations, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, all of that, the right wing. Mm-hmm. Who is Antifa? What type of threat are they? Okay,
I'm doing this pro forma. Antifa is a generic term for anyone who is an anti-fascist, right? Like there was a joke a couple of years ago when the alt-right was going out and calling themselves, you know, pro-fascist and all this stuff, and the term Antifa came up, and the commanding general of the 82nd, I think it was the 82nd Airborne or the 101st Airborne, put out a tweet that said the 101st Airborne has a long storied history of anti-fascist activity. And it showed these guys at D-Day holding a Nazi flag up after jumping into Normandy, right? And I was like, massive troll. You know, that's the way you do it. There are two elements that I think people have mistaken as an organized group. There's this group called Black Bloc anarchists. And Black Bloc are these white, relatively young anarchists who go to just about every protest in the world, no matter what it is, and they break and they smash things. They used to be famous here in DC for going to like the World Bank. Every time there would be a G7 summit or a World Bank summit, they would go down to K Street and they would smash windows, right? They put on all black, they do this stuff. When the Black Lives Matter protests started in the summer of 2020, these people came to these protests and were leading edge smashers and people starting fires. There's a famous video in Santa Monica where two young white women are spray painting Black Lives Matter, you know, F the police on the side of a Starbucks. And a black woman from Black Lives Matter comes over and goes, who are you and why are you putting this stuff here? You're not with us. Why are you writing Black Lives Matter? You're white. And they were like, we're on your side, we're on your side. And they start smashing windows, right? Black Lives Matter was not out there destroying things and smashing windows. When you start a riot, people are going to riot. Right? I'm from Philadelphia. See what happens when we win the Super Bowl, right? They have to literally grease the poles so that they don't tear down $100,000 light fixtures. They will riot. What you saw here in the Capitol was not a riot. What you saw here was an organized insurrection.
Well, you know, there's this scene of the mob, you know, lunging forward and a group in formation holding the back.
Holding the back of their hands. Yeah, that was an Oath Keepers group. And we saw numerous of them. I'm part of a group that is trying to identify military members through the photographs by the and what kind of equipment they have.
I asked at one point, why aren't you arresting people? When
on
it
the
was
ground,
going on?
Hands over your head, cross your legs.
And what they told me is that, well, there's just too many of them. And I was like,
no.
What?
Law enforcement, the enforcement of law collapsed that day. Every one of them will tell you that. Right? Some places were you know, the one officer who said when they were trying to grab his pistol and he was appealing to them through his humanity, he said, if I only got like 16 rounds and, you know, they were taking his other magazines, and he goes, it would have been a bloodbath there. It would have been a bloodbath. We would have had the massacre on the Capitol.
Wow. Let me ask you, Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Many people that sent in questions wanted to know what to do with their family members that are involved in QAnon, their family members who believe that it was Antifa in disguise and not Trump supporters. The way it's being characterized on TV and some stations is, well, I mean, it was a riot, and you know, Trump's had 1 million rallies, and that's the first one where there was any violence, and you know, at least no businesses were harmed. And I mean, what's the difference between that and what happened in Milwaukee and what's happening in Portland?
So what can you do? What can you do as an individual? When you're in a stage 1 insurgency, which is what we're in, where you have a political organization agitating that the current government is powerless and can really do nothing. When you have an incident like this insurrection, call into doubt their belief system. Constantly ask, do you believe that? Do you believe that? Right? You cannot be a loyal American patriot and think that this building should have burned, or that democracy should have been stopped, or that you want to put in a dictator. Do you believe Donald Trump should be a sole dictator? Yes or no? But what you have to do is, you as the citizen have to bring them into us. You have to say, hey man, or one, what you said does not meet any of the values. I always confront people with e pluribus unum. Do you not believe in this? Well, you know, do you not know what it means? From many one. It's literally the motto of the United States. From many one. I love seeing that phrase.
Well,
I love seeing the Statue of Columbia.
Yes.
Which was designed by an African-American woman.
Yes.
So we are a nation of many people. Whether you want it or not, there will be no dominant tribe. And you cannot fight your way to dominance. We are a nation of many people, men and women, who will defend the values that are enshrined in this building and that sit in a case down Pennsylvania Avenue. I love coming to the city and seeing these things. We all have the chance to help make America better. You might have to talk to your neighbors whether you agree with them or not. But let them know that you're an American, a true American. And patriots, the word patriot is not owned by a political group.
Or
patriot is someone who loves, or a tribe.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this time.
Pleasure.
This was really, really important. And we are at a crossroads in our country, and we cannot rest until we get a handle on this. And I am hopeful. I'm very hopeful that the new administration is actually going to investigate this. But I hope that you'll continue to talk with us, because the folks in the Los Angeles area, in the 37th Congressional District, really like to hear from you. Thank you.